If you've ever helped a stranger and wondered if it mattered, this story is going to hit you harder than you expect. Nobody wanted to help the old man lying on the sidewalk outside the bus station. He smelled like sweat and wet cardboard. His clothes were torn. His shoes had no laces. 31 people walked past him in 2 hours, but 3 strangers stopped. A waitress, a mechanic, a 12-year-old girl. They didn't know each other. They didn't know him. And they had no idea that what they did on that sidewalk would come back to them years later in ways that changed everything. Welcome to today's story. Before we begin, please subscribe and like this video. We always love hearing where our viewers are from. Tell us in the comments. New York? Nairobi? Maybe Kingston or Manchester? Say hello. Now, you might be wondering why an old man was lying on a sidewalk and nobody would help. Let me tell you, because it matters. And it starts with a man named Augustine. Poor, sweet Augustine. Bless his heart. Augustine Obi was 73 years old. He was a large man once, 6'1", broad shoulders, thick arms, but the years had taken pieces of him the way a river takes pieces of a bank, slowly, steadily, until what was left was thinner and softer and smaller than what used to be. His skin was dark brown, ashy from dehydration and sun, with deep lines across his forehead and around his mouth that looked like they had been cut with a knife. His hair was white, completely white, thick and uncombed, standing up from his head like cotton. His eyes were his best feature, large, dark, with heavy lids that made him look sleepy even when he was wide awake. Those eyes had a warmth to them that most people never noticed, because most people never looked past the torn clothes and the smell and the shoes with no laces. Augustine was lying on the sidewalk outside the Greyhound station in a town called Ridgewood, about an hour south of Memphis, Tennessee. It was July, hot, 94 degrees, the kind of southern heat that sits on you like a wet blanket and doesn't move. The concrete was so hot you could feel it through your shoes. Augustine was lying on that concrete, on his side, with his knees pulled up and his hands pressed against his chest. He wasn't sleeping. He was sick. His heart, the heart that had been working hard for 73 years, the heart that had been damaged by decades of stress and poor diet and untreated high blood pressure, was doing something it had never done before. It was stuttering, skipping beats, squeezing in a way that sent pain shooting down his left arm and up into his jaw. Augustine knew what was happening. He was a doctor. Now, I know what you're thinking. A doctor, lying on a sidewalk, looking like that? But that is exactly the point of this story. Pay attention, because what you see on the outside of a person is almost never the truth of what's inside. Dr. Augustine Obi had been a cardiologist for 37 years. He practiced in Memphis, at Methodist University Hospital, one of the best cardiac programs in the state. He performed over 4,000 heart surgeries in his career. He saved lives the way other people file paperwork, steadily, consistently, without fanfare. He published research papers. He trained residents. He sat with patients' families in waiting rooms at 2 a.m. and explained in plain language what was happening to their father or mother or husband or wife, because Augustine believed that medical jargon was a wall that doctors built between themselves and the people who needed them, and he refused to build walls. He was good at his job, not just competent, gifted. His hands were steady, his mind was sharp, his instincts were the kind that other doctors envied and tried to study and could never quite replicate. Because instinct isn't taught in medical school. It comes from somewhere deeper, from experience, from empathy, from the part of a doctor that feels the patient's heartbeat as if it were his own. Augustine retired at 68, not because he wanted to, because his own heart told him to. Atrial fibrillation, irregular heartbeat. The cardiologist had become the cardiac patient, which is the kind of irony that God seems to enjoy more than the person experiencing it. He took his medications. He followed his diet. He did everything right. And then his family did everything wrong. Augustine had 3 children. A son named Victor, 45, who worked in pharmaceutical sales and lived in a large house in Germantown, and drove a BMW and wore watches that cost more than some people's annual salary. A daughter named Cynthia, 42, who married a real estate developer and lived in Nashville, and decorated her house with the aggressive perfection of a woman who wanted the world to believe her life was as polished as her countertops. And a son named Daniel, 38, who was the youngest and the quietest, and the one Augustine loved most, though he would never say that out loud, because fathers are not supposed to have favorites, but they always do. Victor and Cynthia were the problem. When Augustine retired, the money slowed down. Not stopped. He had savings, a pension, investments, but it slowed. And Victor and Cynthia, who had spent their adult lives treating their father's income like a river they could drink from whenever they were thirsty, noticed immediately. Victor called first. "Dad, I need $40,000 for a down payment on a lake house." Augustine said no. Victor didn't speak to him for 3 months. Cynthia called next. "Daddy, the kitchen renovation is going over budget. I just need $25,000. Augustine said no. Cynthia called him selfish. She said, "After everything you have, you can't help your own daughter?" Augustine said, "I gave you a medical education you didn't use, a wedding that cost $60,000, and a down payment on your first house. At some point, Cynthia, the bank of Dad closes." Cynthia hung up. She didn't call for 6 months. Daniel was different. Daniel never asked for money. Daniel worked as a high school science teacher in East Memphis, $38,000 a year, which is what society pays the people who shape its children, which tells you everything about society's priorities. Daniel drove a used Camry. He lived in a small apartment. He called Augustine every Sunday evening, and they talked about football and fishing and the garden Augustine was growing in the backyard of his house in Midtown. Tomatoes, peppers, green beans, the kind of ordinary, honest plants that don't need much except sun and water and someone who pays attention. Daniel was the only one who visited regularly. Every other weekend, he drove to Augustine's house, mowed the lawn, fixed whatever needed fixing, and sat on the back porch with his father drinking sweet tea and watching the sun go down. He didn't do these things because he expected anything in return. He did them because Augustine was his father, and that was enough. But what happened next changed everything. 2 years after Augustine retired, something broke. Not his heart. That was already broken. His spirit. The loneliness settled in like fog, thick, gray, everywhere. The house was too quiet. The phone didn't ring. Victor and Cynthia had pulled away so completely that Augustine sometimes forgot he had 3 children instead of 1. He stopped cooking. He stopped gardening. He stopped taking his medication, not on purpose, but in the careless way that depressed people stop doing things, one small surrender at a time, until the pile of surrenders becomes an avalanche. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. He was the one who showed up. He found the pill bottles full, the garden dead, the refrigerator empty except for a carton of expired milk and a jar of pickles. He sat his father down at the kitchen table and said, "Dad, what's happening?" Augustine looked at his youngest son. He tried to smile. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm tired, Danny, that's all. Just tired." But it wasn't just tired. It was the kind of tired that sleeps in the bones and doesn't leave when you rest. The kind that comes from being 70 years old and realizing that 2 of your 3 children only valued you for your checkbook. And now that the checkbook was closed, so were they. Daniel moved in. He gave up his apartment, packed his things into the Camry, and moved into his father's house. He cooked. He cleaned. He made sure Augustine took his pills. He sat with him on the porch every evening. He didn't ask permission. He just did it. Because that is what love looks like when it stops talking and starts working. But Augustine had a plan he didn't tell anyone about, not even Daniel. Augustine had spent 37 years studying hearts. He understood that the truest test of a heart, not the organ, the character, is how it behaves when there is nothing to gain. He had seen it in hospitals 1,000 times. The family that visits every day when the patient is rich. The family that disappears when the money runs out. The visitors who come for the inheritance. The visitors who come for the person. Augustine wanted to test the world, not his children. He already knew what Victor and Cynthia were. He wanted to test strangers. He wanted to know if kindness still existed in a world that had shown him so much of the opposite. So one morning in July, Augustine told Daniel he was going to visit a friend in Ridgewood for the weekend. He packed a small bag. He drove his car to the Greyhound station in Ridgewood, an hour away, and he parked it in the long-term lot. He changed his clothes in the bathroom. He put on torn pants, a stained t-shirt, a jacket with holes. He removed the laces from his shoes. He rubbed dirt on his hands and face. He left his wallet in the car, except for his driver's license, which he folded and tucked into his sock. Dr. Augustine Obi, cardiologist, surgeon, father of 3, owner of a house and a pension and a portfolio of investments, walked out of the Greyhound station bathroom looking like a homeless man. He sat on the sidewalk. He waited to see what the world would do. And this is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. For 2 hours, Augustine sat on that sidewalk. The sun beat down. The heat rose from the concrete in waves. People walked past, businessmen, mothers with strollers, teenagers, truck drivers, retirees. 31 people walked past. Augustine counted them the way he used to count heartbeats on a monitor, precisely, without emotion, recording the data. Some looked, most didn't. One man crossed the street to avoid walking near him. A woman pulled her child closer. A teenager took a photo, not to help, to post. 31 people. Not one stopped. And then Augustine's heart, the real one, the one made of muscle and valves, decided it was time to remind him that he was not as young as his experiment required. The flutter came first, a familiar sensation, like a bird trapped in his chest. Then the squeeze, tight, painful, the left side of his chest compressing in a way that sent ice down his arm. Augustine lay down on the sidewalk. Not by choice. His body put him there. He lay on his side, knees up, hands pressed against his chest, eyes open, watching shoes walk past. Brown shoes, black shoes, white sneakers, sandals, flip-flops, all walking past. And then a pair of shoes stopped. They were ugly shoes, old sneakers, white once, gray now, with ketchup stains on the toe and the sole worn smooth. They belonged to a woman named Pearl Watkins. She was 44 years old, a waitress at the Waffle House on Route 9, and she was walking to work for the 3 to 11 shift, carrying her apron in a plastic bag because it was too hot to wear it on the walk. Pearl looked down at Augustine. She saw the torn clothes, she saw the dirt, she saw the shoes with no laces. She saw a human being lying on concrete in 94-degree heat with his hands on his chest and a look on his face that Pearl recognized because she'd seen it before. On her father, the night he had his heart attack in the kitchen of their house in South Haven. The night Pearl was 16 and called 911 and held his hand and watched the paramedics work and learned, in the most brutal possible way, what it looks like when a heart is in trouble. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" Pearl knelt down. Her knees hit the hot concrete. She didn't flinch. She put her hand on Augustine's shoulder. "I think you're having a heart problem. I'm going to call an ambulance." "No ambulance," Augustine whispered. "No insurance." "I don't care about insurance. You're having a heart attack." "I'm okay. Just need to rest." Pearl looked at him. Her eyes were sharp, the eyes of a woman who had been lied to by enough men to know what lying looked like. "Sir, you are not okay. Your lips are gray. You're sweating in a way that has nothing to do with this heat. And you're holding your chest like something inside is trying to get out." She pulled her phone from her pocket. "I'm calling 911. "Please don't. I'll be fine. Just give me a minute." Pearl hesitated. She looked at his face, the pain, the stubbornness, the fear underneath the stubbornness. She put her phone away. She sat down on the sidewalk beside him, right there, in her work pants and her ketchup-stained sneakers, on the hot concrete, next to a man who smelled like sweat and looked like nobody. "Then I'm staying," she said, "until you're not gray anymore." She opened her plastic bag and pulled out a water bottle. The one she brought for her shift, filled from the tap at home because bottled water was a luxury Pearl couldn't afford. She unscrewed the cap and held it to Augustine's lips. "Small sips," she said. "Don't gulp." Augustine drank. The water was warm, but it was wet, and it was given with care, and that mattered more than temperature. Pearl sat with him for 20 minutes. She talked to him, quietly, casually, the way you talk to someone who is scared and trying not to show it. She told him about the Waffle House, about the regulars, about a man named Earl who came in every morning at 6 and ordered the same thing: 2 eggs, bacon, hash browns scattered and covered, and left a $5 tip every single time, which was more than the meal cost. And when Pearl asked him why, Earl said, "Because you remember my name." "That's the thing about people," Pearl told Augustine. "Most of them forget. But the ones who remember, they're the ones who keep you going." Augustine's chest loosened. The flutter faded. The squeeze released. His lips went from gray to brown. His breathing steadied. Whatever his heart had been doing, it had stopped doing it. For now. Pearl helped him sit up. She gave him the rest of the water. She reached into her plastic bag again and pulled out a sandwich. Ham and cheese on white bread, wrapped in foil, her own dinner for her break at 8 o'clock. "Eat this," she said. "That's your dinner. I'll grab something at the restaurant. Eat." Augustine ate. The sandwich was simple: cheap ham, American cheese, white bread. It tasted like mercy. Pearl stood up. She was late for her shift. She looked at Augustine one more time. "You should see a doctor," she said. Augustine almost laughed. "I'll think about it." "Don't think about it. Do it." She paused. "What's your name?" "Augustine." "Augustine, I'm Pearl. And I'm going to worry about you tonight, so do me a favor and don't die on this sidewalk." She pointed at him with one finger, firm, motherly, the gesture of a woman who was used to telling people what to do and having them listen. "Promise me." "I promise." Pearl nodded. She walked away. Her ketchup-stained sneakers disappeared around the corner. Augustine watched her go. But the story was just beginning. The second stranger came 40 minutes later, a man named Raymond Okafor. He was 36 years old, a mechanic at a tire shop on Jefferson Avenue, and he was walking home after his shift. 9 hours of changing tires and rotating brakes and crawling under cars, his hands black with grease, his work shirt dark with sweat. Ray saw Augustine sitting on the sidewalk. He had seen people on sidewalks before. Ridgewood was not a wealthy town, and sidewalk sitters were not unusual. Most times, Ray walked past. Not out of cruelty, out of habit. The habit of a man who worked too many hours and carried too many worries and had learned to ration his compassion because there wasn't enough of it to go around. But something about Augustine made Ray stop. Maybe it was the white hair, which reminded Ray of his own grandfather in Nigeria, a man named Papa Emeka, who sat on the porch of his house in Enugu every evening and told stories about the Biafran War to anyone who would listen. Maybe it was the eyes, those large, dark, heavy-lidded eyes that looked like they were holding something bigger than sadness. Maybe it was just the heat and the thought that no old man should be sitting on concrete in 94 degrees without water. Ray walked over. He crouched down. "Oga, you all right?" Augustine looked up. The word Oga, a Yoruba term of respect, hit him like a wave. He hadn't heard it in years. His own children didn't call him anything in their native language. They had erased it, the way they had erased so many things about where they came from. "I'm managing," Augustine said. Ray looked at him more carefully. He saw the chest, the way Augustine's hand kept drifting to his left side, pressing, rubbing, as if trying to soothe something underneath. Ray had seen his grandfather do the same thing in the months before Papa Emeka died. Heart trouble. Ray didn't know the medical terms, but he knew the gesture. "You need to see a doctor, Oga." "I'm fine." Ray sat down next to him. He didn't argue. He just sat. He pulled his phone from his pocket and called his wife, Amara. He said, "I'm going to be late. There's an old man here who needs help." Amara said, "Then help him. I'll keep your dinner warm. Ray sat with Augustine for an hour. He talked about his shop, the tire shop, the owner who was cheap, the customers who complained about prices and didn't tip. He talked about his wife and his 2 daughters, Chioma, who was 8, and Adeze, who was 5. He talked about Nigeria, about Enugu, about the red dust, about the smell of suya from the roadside stands at night. And Augustine listened, and something inside him, something that had been cold and quiet for a long time, warmed up. Before Ray left, he did something that made Augustine's throat tight. He took off his work boots, heavy, steel-toed, the boots of a man who stands on concrete all day, and he pulled the laces out. He knelt down and threaded the laces through Augustine's laceless shoes, tying them firmly, double knotting them the way you tie a child's shoes. There, Ray said. Now you can walk without tripping. Augustine looked at his shoes, at the new laces, grease-stained work boot laces and a pair of dress shoes that didn't match. The most beautiful thing he had ever seen on his feet. Thank you, Augustine said. Oga, in my village we say, the hand that gives is the hand that never goes empty. Ray smiled, a wide, easy Nigerian smile. Take care of yourself. Ray walked away in his boots with no laces, his socks visible at the ankle, his steps careful on the hot pavement. And then came the 3rd stranger, the one who changed everything. Her name was Lily. She was 12 years old. Lily Barnes was walking home from the library, the Ridgewood Public Library, a small brick building with a leaky roof and a collection of books that hadn't been updated since 2015. She went there every day in the summer because her house didn't have air conditioning and the library did. And because Lily loved books the way some children love sports or video games, completely, obsessively, with the kind of devotion that adults call gifted when it produces results and weird when it doesn't. Lily was small for 12. Barely 5 feet, with skinny arms and legs and a face that was mostly eyes. Big, brown, serious eyes behind glasses that were slightly too large for her face and that she pushed up her nose every 30 seconds with one finger. She wore shorts and a t-shirt and sneakers that were clean because Lily cleaned them every night with a toothbrush and soap, because her mother couldn't afford new ones, and Lily wanted them to last. Lily saw Augustine sitting on the sidewalk. She stopped. She looked at him for a long time, the way children look at things, without filtering, without the adult instinct to categorize and dismiss. She saw an old man. She saw white hair. She saw tired eyes. She saw shoes with mismatched laces. Lily walked over and sat down, right next to him, on the hot sidewalk, without asking, without hesitation, the way children sit, suddenly, completely, as if the ground had been waiting for them. Are you okay? Lily said. I'm all right, sweetheart. You don't look all right. You look sad. Augustine almost smiled. Children see everything. Everything adults train themselves to ignore, children see with perfect clarity. Maybe a little sad. Lily reached into her backpack. She pulled out a book, a library book, thick, the cover worn soft from being read by dozens of hands before hers. She looked at it. She looked at Augustine. Do you want me to read to you? She said. When I'm sad, my mama reads to me. She says stories fix things that medicine can't. Augustine's eyes filled. He blinked hard. What book is it? Lily held it up. It was a book about the human heart. A children's science book with illustrations and diagrams and simple explanations of how the heart works. She had checked it out because she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. It's about hearts, Lily said. The real kind. The ones that pump blood. Augustine, Dr. Augustine Obi, cardiologist, 4,000 heart surgeries, 37 years of saving lives, looked at this 12-year-old girl holding a children's book about the human heart, offering to read to him on a sidewalk, and he laughed. A real laugh. Deep and surprised, and full of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. I would love that, he said. Lily opened the book. She began to read. Her voice was clear and careful, the voice of a child who loves words and treats them with respect. She read about the 4 chambers, about the valves, about how the heart beats 100,000 times a day without being told to, about how it starts beating before a baby is born and doesn't stop until the very end. The heart, Lily read, is the only muscle in the body that never rests. It works every second of every day for your entire life without taking a break. She looked up at Augustine. That's kind of amazing, right? It never takes a break. It just keeps going. It does, Augustine said. It just keeps going. Lily read for 30 minutes, the whole chapter on the heart. When she finished, she closed the book and looked at Augustine with those big, serious eyes. Are you going to be okay? She asked. I think so. You should see a doctor. My mama says you should always see a doctor if your chest hurts. Your mama is very smart. She's a nurse. She works at the clinic on 4th Street. Lily paused. She says the heart is the most important organ because it's the one that keeps everything else alive. Without the heart, nothing works. Augustine looked at this child, this 12-year-old girl with glasses too big for her face and sneakers she cleaned with a toothbrush, and he saw something. He saw the future. He saw the kind of doctor she would become, the kind who sits down next to a stranger on a sidewalk and reads to them, the kind who sees a human being instead of a diagnosis, the kind Augustine had always tried to be. Lily, he said, what do you want to be when you grow up? A heart surgeon, she said, without hesitation, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Augustine reached out and put his hand on her shoulder, his large, dark, tired hand on her small, skinny shoulder. You're going to be a great one, he said. Lily smiled. She put the book in her backpack, stood up and said, I have to go. My mama's waiting. She took 3 steps, then turned back. Augustine? That's a really cool name. It means great. Did you know that? I did. Well, live up to it. She pointed at him, the same gesture Pearl had made, firm, direct, the gesture of a person who expects to be obeyed. Then she walked away, her backpack bouncing, her clean sneakers tapping on the sidewalk. Augustine sat on the concrete and watched her go. 3 strangers, a waitress who gave him her dinner, a mechanic who gave him his bootlaces, a 12-year-old girl who read him a book about hearts. He stood up. His chest was calm. His heart was steady. He walked to the parking lot, changed back into his real clothes, and drove home. He didn't tell anyone what happened. Not Daniel. Not anyone. He carried the day like a stone in his pocket, warm, heavy, important. But what happened next would change everything. 3 years passed. Augustine's health stabilized. The medication worked. Daniel's cooking helped. The garden grew back. Augustine sat on the porch every evening and watched the tomatoes ripen and thought about Pearl and Ray and Lily. He thought about them every single day. He thought about ketchup-stained sneakers and grease-stained bootlaces and a library book about hearts. He thought about 31 people who walked past and 3 people who stopped. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, Augustine made 3 phone calls. Finding Pearl took 1 week. She was still at the Waffle House, same shift, same sneakers, same $5 tips from Earl. Finding Ray took 2 weeks. He had moved. New tire shop, better pay, a house in South Haven with a yard for the girls. Finding Lily took 3 weeks. She was 15 now, a freshman at Ridgewood High School. Straight A's, member of the science club. Still went to the library every day. Still wanted to be a heart surgeon. Augustine visited them one at a time. He went to Pearl first. He walked into the Waffle House on a Wednesday afternoon, wearing his real clothes, a pressed shirt, dark trousers, good shoes with proper laces. He looked like what he was, a retired doctor, distinguished, dignified, nothing like the man on the sidewalk. Pearl was behind the counter refilling coffees. She looked up when he walked in. She squinted. Something familiar. The eyes, the white hair, the way he stood. Augustine? She said. Hello, Pearl. She set the coffee pot down. She came around the counter. She looked at him, at the clean clothes, the pressed shirt, the watch on his wrist, the posture of a man who had spent his life standing in operating rooms with other people's hearts in his hands. "You clean up pretty good," Pearl said. Augustine laughed. Then he told her. Everything. The career, the 4,000 surgeries, the retirement, the children who stopped calling, the test, the sidewalk, the heart flutter that turned real. He told her that the day she stopped and knelt on hot concrete and gave a stranger her dinner, she saved a man who had spent 37 years saving other people and had forgotten how to save himself. Pearl listened. Her eyes got wide, then wet.
Then she laughed, a big, full Waffle House laugh that made the cook look up and the regulars turn their heads. "I gave my dinner to a heart surgeon," she said. "I gave a ham sandwich to a man who's operated on 4,000 hearts. Lord have mercy." Augustine set an envelope on the counter. Inside was a check and a letter. The check was for $250,000. The letter explained that the money was for Pearl's education, whatever she wanted to study, wherever she wanted to go. Pearl had told him on the sidewalk that she had always wanted to be a nurse but could never afford school. Now she could. Pearl stared at the check. Her hands shook. The coffee pot was forgotten. "Augustine, I can't take this." "You gave me your dinner when you couldn't afford to skip a meal. You sat on hot concrete in your work clothes. You told me not to die." He smiled. "This is the least I can do." Pearl cried. Right there in the Waffle House, in front of Earl and the regulars and the cook, she cried. And then she hugged Augustine. The kind of hug that is part gratitude and part disbelief, and part the overwhelming realization that a ham sandwich and 20 minutes of kindness had come back multiplied beyond imagination. Augustine went to Ray next. He found him at the new tire shop under a Honda Accord, hands black with grease. He slid out from under the car, saw Augustine, and said, "Olga?" Augustine told him everything. Ray sat on an overturned bucket in the shop, grease on his hands and tears on his face, and listened. "I laced your shoes," Ray said. "I just laced your shoes. You gave me your laces. You called your wife and told her you'd be late. You sat with me for an hour. You treated me with dignity when I looked like I had none." Augustine gave Ray an envelope. Inside was a check for $300,000 and a business plan. Augustine had hired a consultant to draw up plans for Ray's own tire and auto repair shop. A real shop in Ray's name, fully equipped, with a lease already signed on a building on Route 78. Ray looked at the business plan. He looked at the check. He looked at Augustine. "Olga, I cannot. In your village, you told me, the hand that gives is the hand that never goes empty. My hand was empty, Ray. You filled it. Now I'm filling yours." Ray stood up from the bucket. He embraced Augustine, the firm, strong hug of a Nigerian man who has been taught that men don't cry, but is crying anyway, grease and tears mixing on Augustine's pressed shirt. And then Augustine went to Lily. He called her mother first, the nurse at the clinic on 4th Street, a woman named Sandra Barnes. He explained who he was. Sandra was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You're the man from the sidewalk? The one Lily read to?" "I am. She talked about you for weeks. She called you the Heart Man. She said you looked like you needed someone to read to you." She was right. Augustine met Lily at the library. She was sitting at a table near the window, surrounded by books, biology, anatomy, chemistry. She looked up when he walked in. She was 15 now. Taller, still thin, still wearing glasses slightly too big, still pushing them up her nose every 30 seconds. She recognized him immediately. "Augustine," she said, "the great one." "Hello, Lily." She looked at his clothes, the shirt, the watch, the shoes. "You look different." "I am different. Because of you." He sat across from her and told her everything. The career, the surgeries, the sidewalk, the test.
He told her that when she sat down next to him and opened a book about hearts and read to him in a clear, careful voice, she did something that 4,000 surgeries and 37 years of medicine had never done. She reminded him why he became a doctor in the first place. Not for the money, not for the title, for the people. For the stranger on the sidewalk who needs someone to stop. Lily listened with those big, serious eyes. When he finished, she said, "You were a heart surgeon the whole time?" "The whole time. And I read you a children's book about hearts?" "The best book about hearts I've ever heard." Lily laughed. A 15-year-old laugh, half embarrassment, half delight. Augustine gave her an envelope. Inside was not a check. Inside was a letter of acceptance. Full scholarship, tuition, housing, books, living expenses, to a pre-med program, funded by the Augustine Obie Foundation for Aspiring Physicians, a foundation Augustine had created that month with a $2 million endowment. The scholarship would take Lily through college and medical school, every penny, for as long as she needed. Lily read the letter. Her hands trembled. Her glasses slid down her nose and she didn't push them up. She read it twice. "You're paying for me to go to medical school?" she whispered. "You're going to be a heart surgeon, Lily. You told me that on a sidewalk 3 years ago with a library book in your hands. I believed you then, and I believe you now." Lily looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. The jaw of a girl who had been told she could be anything and had finally met someone who meant it. "I'm going to be the best one," she said. "I know you are." Lily stood up from the table. She walked around it. She hugged Augustine, a 15-year-old girl hugging a 76-year-old man in a public library, holding on tight, the way you hold on to something you've been waiting for your whole life. "Thank you," she said, "for coming back." "Thank you for stopping," Augustine said. 31 people walked past me. You sat down. Lily pulled back. She pushed her glasses up her nose. She smiled. That big-eyed, serious, gap-toothed, world-changing smile. "My mama says the heart never takes a break," Lily said. "It just keeps going." I think that's what kindness is. It never takes a break either. It just keeps going. From one person to the next, like a heartbeat. Augustine looked at this girl, this future surgeon, this reader of books, this sitter down next to strangers, and he felt his heart beating. Strong, steady. 100,000 beats a day, every one of them a gift, every one of them a reason. 6 months later, Pearl enrolled in nursing school. She was the oldest student in the class. She was also the most determined. She graduated 2 years later, top of her class, and got a job at a community health clinic in Memphis. The same kind of clinic that had never been available to the people she'd grown up with. On her first day, she taped a small sign to her desk. It said, "Every patient has a name. Use it." Ray opened his shop, Okafor Tire and Auto, on Route 78. The sign was painted green and white, the colors of Nigeria. He hired 3 mechanics, all of them young men from immigrant families who needed a chance. On the wall of the waiting room, he hung a pair of old work boot laces in a frame. Underneath, a small card read, "These laces were given to a stranger. That stranger gave me everything." Lily started college the following fall. Pre-med, full scholarship. She called Augustine every Sunday evening, the same time Daniel called, and she told him about her classes, her professors, the cadaver lab that scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. She told him she was going to specialize in cardiology. "Because of you," she said. "Because you showed me that a heart can break and still keep beating." One Sunday evening, Augustine was sitting on the porch with Daniel, drinking sweet tea, watching the sun go down behind the tomato plants. His phone buzzed. It was Lily. "Hey, Augustine, guess what?" "What?" "I got the highest grade in anatomy, the heart unit. The professor said my essay on cardiac rhythm was the best she'd ever read from a freshman." Augustine smiled. The porch light smile. The heart still beating smile. "That doesn't surprise me one bit," he said. "She asked me where I learned so much about hearts. I told her a man on a sidewalk taught me. A girl on a sidewalk taught me more." He hung up. He looked at Daniel. Daniel was watching him, the way sons watch fathers, with love and worry and the quiet hope that the old man will be okay for a while longer. "Who was that?" Daniel asked. "The future," Augustine said. "She's 15 years old and she's going to change the world." Daniel smiled. "I believe it." "Danny?" "Yeah, Dad." "Thank you. For the lawn. For the sweet tea. For moving in when nobody asked you to. For being the one who showed up." Daniel looked at his father. "You don't have to thank me, Dad." "I do. Because 31 people walked past me. But you never did. Not once." They sat on the porch as the sun went down, and the fireflies rose from the grass, and the tomatoes glowed red in the last light. A father and a son. 2 cups of sweet tea. The sound of crickets and a heart. Still beating, still going, 100,000 times a day, without taking a break. That's the end of today's story, but the lessons last forever. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and tell us in the comments, which character reminded you of someone in your own life? See you soon.